Hi, everybody. Today is Saturday, February 21st, 2026, and our dear friend Mark Sleboda is here with us. Welcome back, Mark.
Nema, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Dialogue Works.
Please hit like button and follow Mark. Let me hear the real politic. And you can see Mark on his boosty.to. You can write on the left side, on the right side of Mark, you can see the his Boosty, that is boosty.to/the real politic. And you can follow Mark on that and subscribe to, and I think you can, you know, you can find a lot of stuff different from what you usually hear in the mainstream media. That's the whole purpose of this sort of podcast that we do here on
Amen.
Dialogue Works. Mark, let me start with what's going on in the Middle East, in the West Asia. The Trump administration has brought a lot of weapons close to Iran, ready to attack Iran. And on the part of Iranians, they're trying to negotiate at the same time, negotiating with the United States, but at the same time, they say that they're not going to negotiate on the ballistic missile program, nor they're not going to negotiate about the help, the support to the axis of resistance. And the latest news from Iran is that the Iranian president stated that the Iranian leadership has decided not to bow to external pressure, no matter how strong it may be. The IRGC and the army are actively preparing to repel aggression and take countermeasures which will affect a large part of the Middle East region. How do you see the whole scene? Do you see that a big war is coming between the United States and Iran largely, or is it you see something different?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to see it in any other way. I think, I mean, quite obviously, there are many people within the Trump regime whom this is what they've been working towards all along. As for Donald Trump and at least a handful, I think they've probably scratching their heads and wondering how the hell they got here and not sure that this is where they want to be, but having there's too much impetus, there's too much domestic political pressure, there's too much driving things forward at this point. I mean, you don't move two aircraft carrier battle groups and hundreds of fighter aircraft over last count I saw was 87 refueling tankers for aircraft. I mean, there's a huge amount of strike power that has been assembled, and that's expensive. And we also, by the way, see in this deployment not only the strength of the U.S. military, but we see its weakness because we see that it is strained, right? We're talking serious military effects of imperial overstretch that is stretching the U.S. Navy thin. So the Abraham Lincoln was the principal aircraft carrier in theater, but quite obviously that wasn't going to be enough for serious attacks on Iran. So there was a decision. We're not quite sure. There's contradictory messages whether it was to bring in another aircraft carrier group or two more aircraft carrier groups. And originally they wanted to bring in the George W. Bush, but evidently there were problems. That it had just finished the deployment. It was undergoing various types of repairs. I've heard all different kinds of rumors about damages to the sanitation system. Who knows? We don't know for sure what it was, but it wasn't seaworthy. That's the most important thing. So then they had to pull the Gerald Ford out of where it was playing babysitting duty over Venezuela and Cuba for the fleet that was assembled there to exert U.S. dominance over the Western Hemisphere, that had to be brought out and rushed. It's still on its way across the Med as we're taping now, to be brought into the theater. So this was not something that they were fully prepared for, at least at the military level. Maybe at the political level, they weren't stressing, to the military their long term requirements. But we also know that from the Trump regime's own national security strategy and its national defense strategy, which came out just over a month ago, that is supposed to translate that into policy. The professed aim on paper of the Trump regime was to get out of the Middle East, to not be dragged into down in the Middle East, but to finally begin the long heralded pivot to Asia, to confront what the U.S. sees as its real peer adversary, China. Now, every U.S. president has been saying that since Obama. And every U.S. president since Obama gets bogged down in the Middle East. Every single one of them. And of course, yes, Iran has and has always been a big part of that, because Iran's not going away. There are certainly some people, definitely within the Netanyahu regime in Israel, and some their, shall we say, best advocates within the United States, right? Whether we're talking Lindsey Graham or other figures within the administration who are real big pro-Israel hawks, for Christian Zionists, whatever you want to call them. They see this as their best and maybe last opportunity to drag the U.S. into a war. Now, the U.S. itself is not being dragged into a war, right? The U.S. doesn't get dragged into wars, right? The U.S. Wades into wars, fists flaying and everything. But certainly, there are different veins of thought. There are different factions, of course, even within any given regime in the United States. And that's true of the Trump regime as it is with any. I have no doubt that there are people within the Trump regime that don't want war with Iran. And I know that there are some that want it very much. And obviously they've got the head. And Trump, whatever he may have claimed or thought, whatever was put into this national defense strategy and national security strategy by Elbridge Colby at the Pentagon, the Undersecretary of Defense for Planning and Policy. They're here, and there's no way for them to back down now. Now, certainly, Netanyahu and his advocates in the U.S. feel that they will never have a U.S. president whom is this both predisposed towards Israel and this weak, that he is able to be manipulated in the way that he is, right, into doing what they want, particularly with regards to Israel. We can talk about his donors, status, all of that, but it's also on a personal level. All of his previous, his own officials in his previous administration, bragged and laughed about manipulating Trump into doing what they wanted. And it's not such a victim thing. That's the way Trump runs his ship, such as it is, right? He wants to be the God emperor of mankind, that people come to his court and pay him court and flatter him and try to convince him and play to his narcissism. And that's the way he wants it. So, I mean, it's not like he's being manipulated. It's not like the good czar manipulated by bad boyars, right? To use a Russianism, it's a bad czar and bad boyars, right? That's what the situation is. But also, I think there's a closing window of military opportunity as well. It's quite obvious now that I mean, to anyone who's been paying any attention, even reading the New York Times or the Washington Post, that there's an acknowledgement that Iran has a quite significant retaliatory long range strike capability, whether we're talking ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, possibly hypersonic missiles, right? And long range drones. There's no question about that, and they have formidable. They don't have a blue water navy or anything, but in terms of anti-ship missiles and small coastal boats with missile capabilities and so forth, they have a fairly credible naval coastal defense force, right? Capable, I think, of capable of inflicting an asymmetric amount of damage for their size. And that capabilities are growing. They're not getting smaller. That long range strike capability, I think, really, for lack of a better, put the fear of God in them last June. I think they severely underestimated it. But even more than that, there are now finally, because it didn't happen before last June, but I think there's enough signals that Iran has started to accept help military wise or military prep wise from Russia and China. And that means that within a fairly short period of time, right, as such things go, within 5 years, Iran could be looking at a very formidable air and missile defense and electronic warfare shield as well, right? If Russia is heavily involved in this, we've seen that they have the most effective in the world, whatever they may claim about David's boomerang and the proven junk that they are Patriot system, in comparison to Russian air defense. So if that Russia has the time to build, they haven't had that time now, right? They have to build up the network. They have to train Iranian people to use this. Takes several years, of course. They haven't had that time yet, but there's a closing window of opportunity military wise until that will be much more difficult. And then, of course, you have the domestic schedule in the United States, right? Trump is rolling into midterm elections. If he loses midterm elections, he's going to be battling Congress, facing impeachments, almost certainly, and he's going to be consumed by that. He may already be consumed at this moment going forward with battles with the Supreme Court over tariffs, right? There's a lot that is going to be heaped on his plate, and he may not have the attention and bandwidth for major foreign policy adventures like this, if that's what you want to call it, going in. So I think that we're really looking. I think the people who want this are looking at their watch and looking at a countdown and knowing they don't have a lot of time. So I think there's actually some urgency behind those powers within both the Trump and the Netanyahu regime who really want this. They're pushing this now. Because it may not be possible like this again. And I don't think their options are that great now, right? And we've talked about this before. I've talked about it on many other channels. But it has recently been confirmed in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and everywhere. The U.S. Achilles heel is air and missile defense. And not only in the capability of their systems, and that's primarily the Patriot and the THAAD, which are kind of long in the tooth. They're old systems. They're not able to handle a lot of modern missile and drone challenges. But even more than capability is their very low industrial production rate of interceptors for the Patriot, and even more so, a very even slower production for the THAAD. And they have not been able to ramp up that production in the last 4 years of the conflict in Ukraine. They were already running short, even before the conflict in Ukraine, from Saudi expenditures in their invasion of Yemen. That was reported in the Western press at the time, that Saudi actually had to work out a deal brokered by the U.S. to transfer Patriot interceptors from other Gulf state countries to Saudi, with promises they would get them back later, because there was already a shortage then. And there was a huge expenditure for Ukraine, of course, right? All up in smoke now. And there was some air defense assets wasted while the Blinken-Sullivan administration, then the Trump administration, was trying to play whack-a-mole against the Houthis in Yemen, not very effectively, with more wastes there. And then, of course, last June, huge expenditure of air defense assets, and Iran was exhausting the supply of interceptors for both Israeli air and missile defense and U.S. air and missile defense and all of the allies, that work with that. And there has been not a year. And we know that a lot of the we know that Raytheon makes probably less than just under 650 air defense interceptors a year for the PAC-3, right? For the Patriot. And that's nothing. That's nothing, especially when it's standard practice to fire at least 2 interceptors at any ballistic target that even have a chance of being able to bring it down, right? And for instance, in Ukraine, the Russians are sometimes firing dozens of Iskanders on top of hypersonic missiles and cruise missiles at a single salvo, right? Several times a week, right? So you see, obviously, they can't supply Ukraine, much less their own military needs, plus less defend Israel. And Iran is certainly capable of firing hundreds, maybe over 1,000 such missiles of various ranges and capabilities at Israel and at U.S. military bases in the region. So what do you use? You don't have the air defense. That have not had a chance to restock that. And there was a report out in Responsible Statecraft highlighting that even of the low production of interceptors that we're at, some of that is still tithed towards long-range contracts on a monthly basis going automatically to Ukraine. So even of that 650, that's not all sitting there for use in against Iran. That is being doled out to Ukraine and other countries and everything. So I was actually shocked when they launched the June Israeli attacks backed by the U.S. last year, because I was like, they don't have enough air defense missiles. What are they thinking? And they thought they were going to get this decapitation strike with Mossad and the CIA on the ground, right? These assassinations, all of this other stuff. And they thought that was going to take out the regime. And then it would just be, cleaning up the mess. Of course, it didn't work out that way. Their decapitation strike was only marginally successful, and that very quickly Iranian air defense, such as it is, started to operate a bit better, and then the long retaliatory strikes began and quickly exhausted Israeli and U.S. air defense capacity. And that's why at the end, right, what happened is it started to turn into a long-range strike war of attrition that was tending in Iran's favor. And so the U.S. had to come in and pull Israel's ass out of the fire, drop some bombs through a prearranged deal with Iran, declare victory, and demand a ceasefire. And here, just months later, right, not even a year later, we're back again. And again, the U.S. and Israel are presented. If they can't immediately take out the Iranian government, again, they're talking openly on the pages of the New York Times assassinations, decapitation strike, right? Their CIA and Mossad insurgency that they launched already failed, was quickly ground out, uh, supposedly with the help of Russian electronic warfare, helping block Starlink and track down the terminals, at least according to Forbes. And they'll be back in the same place unless they've got some magic card up their sleeves to take out the Iranian government quickly and completely, either the government or some magical seed campaign that can wipe out all of Iran's mobile missile launchers all over the country in a few days. If they can't do that, and I don't think that they can, could be wrong, but I don't think that they can. They can do damage. I mean, no one doubts that. No one doubts that Iran is going to suffer huge damage. The question is, can they survive? Right? This is the power imbalance between the US and Iran is the same type of power imbalance dictating, what are the terms for victory between Israel and Hamas or Hezbollah, such that Iran wins if the government survives. That's it, right? The US has openly said regime change. Trump said openly that's the best outcome, right? I mean, there's no question that that's what they're working for. There's no question that this is nothing about nuclear enrichment. This is nothing about any fictional nuclear program. Even if you tossed in the ballistic missile programs and made Iran completely vulnerable to an Israel that has attacked them multiple times over the last few years, something that no sane country, with an ounce of sovereignty and independence would or could do. And this thing about the Shiite groups that they support across the Middle East, it's just absurd. I mean, the US is the only country allowed to arm and use proxies around the world. Come on. No. Iran can't accept those terms. So the US sent out those terms knowing that they're impossible for Iran to meet, and that every side is going through the motion while forces on both sides are being assembled, right? I'm sure most of your audience out there, like me, is seeing all kinds of social media, Telegram, Twitter X, of cargo planes going back and forth between Russia and Tehran, China and Tehran, even Minsk and Tehran, all over. We don't know what is being, we don't know. We don't. We can speculate a lot, but we're not going to be told that, at least not until it's all over, and maybe not then. But we can presume that at the very least, Russia and China both are going to be supplying Iran with major C4 ISR, major satellite information. China's already making public the locations of lots of, public photos with lots of locations of U.S. air defense that they've hastily assembled at their bases across the Middle East and in Israel and so forth. And that alone will be a huge aid to Iran in striking back. But it's probably something more than that. So what are the U.S. options? If they can't take out the Iranian government like that with a decapitation strike, some magic discombobulator ray or whatever Trump is on about, or some CIA Mossad magic, then we're right back where we were last June. And that would mean in these terms Iranian victory, right? Because they will win a long-range strike of attrition campaign. Again, because of the U.S.-Israeli relative weakness in terms of air and missile defense capacity. Now, if the Trump administration has a moment of sanity and decides that their options that the Pentagon presents aren't good, Trump wanted a quick and dirty victory. It's obvious now that he's not going to get that. Then we will suddenly hear the US talking about the nuclear program and nothing else. And there will be some type of enrichment agreement, maybe Russia, transferring nuclear to Russia, or Russia stepping in as some type of inspection role, or Iran agreeing to some 1.5% enrichment, something like that. But that will only be if the Trump administration is backing down and is looking for a face-saving, PR spin of walking away from this. And I don't know, I haven't heard anyone that actually thinks that that's where things are going. It's not impossible, right? So we have to say that. If we start hearing that, that's what we know it is the Trump administration realizes they don't have good military options, and they're, for at least the time being, trying to walk away from it. No sign of that so far that I have seen or that I've heard anyone reporting on. So by the end of this week, certainly the Gerald Ford will be in theater, at least off the coast of Israel, able to provide some additional air defense capability to Israel there. And that's when we can really look. We've heard various comments that it could start this weekend, right? We could get off this podcast and find out that it's begun, or it could begin sometime this night. We don't know that. I think it's likely not to happen for a few more days, because this would be such a big, they will want to have as many assets as they can reasonably have in theater. So I think most likely we've got another 5 days to a week. But Trump said that, and Trump said that last time, and then that was used as a that talks were still going on as a lure to bring down the Iranians' guard, and Israel launched their sneak attack. The Iranians, of course, are not going to be caught, asleep at the wheel again in this situation. Plus, there are Russian and Chinese ships in the area. Not a lot of them, right? It must be said there's one Russian corvette there, as far as I know, the Strikey. And China has a few ships that were there for already scheduled annual Russia, Iranian, Chinese naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, or off the coast of Oman, I should say. But those certainly have additional intelligence capabilities, and they will be monitoring what the U.S. is doing, which pretty much guarantees, I think, that there cannot, that and other satellite information, those ships are not going to engage in defense of Iran directly. Everyone should not have those expectations. That's not what's going to happen. We're not going to see Chinese troops in Tehran, right? But it's not going to be that thing anyway, right? The U.S. does not have an invasion force. No one is even talking about that. Certainly not at this stage. Now, what I am hearing is lots of rumors about the U.S. preparing to activate various separatist groups. And what we're talking about there, of course, is our best buddies in the Mujahideen Khalq, those crazy motherfuckers that were previously listed as terrorists by the United States until they were deemed to be geopolitically useful, a lot like the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo and Serbia. But they will certainly be deployed if it's if they're really looking for regime change. Baluchi and possibly ethnic Azerbaijani separatist groups. And I've even heard about Kurds being activated by the United States, which is another possibility. And of course, here we're talking about Iranian Kurds. It's always important to remember when talking about the Kurds is there's no united Kurdish nation. There's different Kurdish groups in every country in the area, all usually operating against each other at some level, right? And all with their own interests and so forth. But I mean, if the Iranian Kurds get dragged into this, after seeing the U.S. throw first the Iraqi Kurds under the bus and then the Syrian Kurds under the bus, I mean, I don't know what to say. That there's something to be said about the cognitive ability of the Kurdish nation as a whole if they allow themselves to be dragged into that proxy role again. That is what could happen on the ground, and those would only have any chance of success if there was huge success with a decapitation strike at political and military targets and a sustained air campaign, which I'm not sure the U.S. is really capable of. Not only is the U.S. short on air defense missiles, they're also relatively short on long-range strike missiles, right? Tomahawks, others. How do we know that? Because the front pages of the Western media told us that a few months ago, right? When the Trump ordered the Pentagon ordered the military-industrial complex to ramp up the production of 10 different missile categories, right? Air defense and long-range strike. Why? Because they were short, right? And again, we haven't had that opportunity to restock those in just the months since then. So there's also a question of how much offensive capability they really have if they want to maintain. Of course, they want standoff strikes. They don't want to enter into Iranian airspace. There's too much danger there. Their carriers don't want to get too close to Iran because Iran does have the capability to send them fathoms down, and they're going to want to, stay out as much as possible out of range. But when we're talking about Iran, I mean, let's be perfectly clear here. Iran is not Venezuela. We're not looking at anything that looks like that. This will be a real war, almost certainly, right? This is not going to be some CIA op where the Iranian government turns over Khomeini to the U.S. and then pretends like they didn't, right? We're not going to see that type of Delcy Rodriguez quizzling bullshit in Iran. That's not here. Yeah, I mean, there's a certain percentage of the Iranian population that is unhappy with the Iranian government. I'm an American or originally an American who was unhappy with the U.S. government. I mean, that happens. But yeah, maybe 30, maybe 35%. But regardless, there's a clear majority that does support the Iranian government, and continual attempts to pretend that is not true by the Iranian expert community in the U.S. and the rest of the West is just them drinking their own Kool-Aid, right? Because they want war, they want, hegemonic operations and the like. They're not experts, they're ideologues, they're anti-Iranian ideologues. And we see the U.S. experts do that with Russia, they do that with China, and so forth. And I mean, I was extremely skeptical about the Venezuelan government's ability to resist the U.S. going into what happened there. I saw that one coming a mile away. I know there's still some people out there that want to pretend what happened didn't really happen, right? They don't want to believe it. I certainly didn't like it. I don't like being a Cassandra and calling that, but I think there were very good reasons to question the Venezuelan government's ability to resist the U.S. That is not the case here. That is not the case. I do not see that at all. I'm not saying that Iran will come out of this unscathed. No one should have any illusions that the U.S. does have incredible destructive power available to them, and that the very worst is always whatever dirty games the CIA and Mossad have cooked up. I think that those are always a bigger threat than even long-range strikes, cruise tomahawks, missile strikes, stealth bomb, whatever. But I don't know what they have left up the sleeve, because I think they already would have blown their load last June, or most recent with these last ones. And I would guess that the CIA and Mossad do not have some magic plan. But we'll find out. I mean that is what we'll find out. But I will tell everyone, pay more attention to what is happening in that covert sphere than even what is happening in the long range strike sphere, because last June Mossad did more damage on the ground than all of the Israeli long range strikes out of Iraqi airspace did to Iran.
No. I think, Mark, we can somehow say, from what I've seen in Iran, I was there for 40 days. I think they have cleaned up a lot of mess in Iran, because
Amen.
they know the threat of that sort of covert operations that you just mentioned. And the I think one of the main points that you've made is so much important, that is, the United States has never experienced, I would say, in the aftermath of the World War II, or maybe Vietnam. In Vietnam, they didn't fight a war, a big war,
No,
a real war.
this
That's
is
what.
an opponent that they have not faced since World War II. Iran is not a near peer competitor to the United States in military on paper. But between what the US is capable of putting into that theater, because they have global hegemonic commitments, that is a different story. There, the US capabilities are limited in what they are capable of hitting Iran with. And it's a very long way from the United States. I don't care how many military bases they have in the region. I don't care CENTCOM and whatever. It's still a strain. It's still a stretch. And Iran has far more capability today than Iraq ever had, or Vietnam ever had, or Korea, going back to the 50s. It's not Russia, right? But I mean, if we're looking at the scale of countries, the U.S., it's just below that. There's not much else there. I mean, North Korea, maybe. I mean, that's where we're looking at. So this is a serious fight, and everything that I have seen from very heavy U.S. involvement in the conflict in Ukraine, and of the war games that NATO has been running recently against drone operations and the like. They just ran this. They actually ran it last May, but we heard the news about this NATO Operation Hedgehog war games, where they had a number of Ukrainians step in and play the role of the Russians. And we saw a handful, basically, 10 Ukrainian drone operators take out dozens of NATO military vehicles and effectively immobilize 2 NATO battalions worth of troops, right? Just a handful. That should tell no one. I mean, of course, that is land centric, right? That is still, not what we're going to be dealing with here. But Iran is very practiced in using drones and all types of long range strike capabilities. I would be very surprised if they're not rolling out unmanned boats, water drones, right, as well, USVs. I'm absolutely certain that we'll see those deployed as well against anything from the U.S. naval-wise that gets anything close. And then, of course, we always have Iran's nuclear option. They just practiced exercises in the Strait of Hormuz, closing the Strait of Hormuz, flood it with sea mines. That's it. That's something the U.S. going into midterm elections, and Americans, Americans are what they are, right? And you Americans out there watching this, that you care about foreign policy, whereas the vast majority of your countrymen otherwise don't. They don't vote on foreign policy. They never have. I don't care. but they will vote on the price at the pump, and the oil price is already going through the roof. And from a cold-blooded realpolitik position, seeing here in Russia and seeing the U.S. ratchet up all these tensions and getting ready to probably launch what will almost certainly be an inconclusive major military campaign against Iran, what I see from Russia's geopolitical position is the price of oil skyrocketing as a result, meaning our finances are going to be great for the special military operation for the next year or so. And it also means that the U.S. is wasting all of these military assets. And, we're in the driver's seat. I mean, we're already in the driver's seat for Ukraine Endgame, but now even more, freedom of operation there. And the Chinese are saying, that's it. I mean, we don't even have to worry about some type of Taiwan or South Sea China. If the U.S. goes seriously here, they're going to be wasting so many assets that they don't have to spare, and they do not have the military industrial complex capability at the moment to ramp up. Then they're going to have years, right, of time of closed window of opportunity to confront China militarily, where they will continue to build up their military all during that time period. And then I already think the idea of fighting China off China's coast is a fantasy for the United States. Then it won't even be a question. You won't even be able to fantasize about it. So the U.S. could they could go terribly geopolitically wrong here. And that's even if they did have some success. They would still be wasting a huge amount of military assets, and it's very likely with their history of even successful geopolitical adventures. I mean, just take a look at Iraq. Did Iraq work out in the U.S. Geopolitical favor, right? Getting rid of Saddam Hussein, making Iraq by population a tacit ally of Iran. I mean, because Shia majority. I mean, there's all kinds of things. If there's anyone in the United States who seriously thinks they're going to put that Muppet Shaw into Iran, I got another. I mean, at least in Venezuela, when it came down to it, there was no talk of sending that Machado woman. I mean, Trump's like, she has no support in the country. That was all just psyop. There's nothing really there, right? But we got Delcy Rodriguez turned, and she's a Quisling, and that works good for us. And so I don't think they're going to find that in Iran. I don't think that Iran is that vulnerable to that type of co-option.
Mark, but the same logic, the same cold blooded logic that you've just mentioned, your analysis would suggest that, let's assume that's the calculation, part of the calculation on the part of Russian and Chinese, but the whole objective going to be to let the war going on and on, not anybody. That's why the United States would be trapped in the Middle East. That's going to bring huge problems to the.
Let's be clear. Russia and China's first priority is for the existing government in Iran to survive, right? It's an ally. They could not see it replaced. They're finally on better terms with that government than they have been, at least since since Iran had a real president, as far as I'm concerned. Once the conflict has begun, they're going to be doing more and more to help the Iranian government, not necessarily out of a sense of dragging out the conflict, but of helping Iran at an existential level, the Iranian government survive, right? I'm not saying that Russia and China are in any way want or encourage this. I'm simply talking what are the geopolitical consequences that they're both going to be factoring in, looking at simulations of where everything is going to go with this. There's very much difference there, in what it is. Um, Russia and China have a vested interest in not seeing the US overthrow the Iranian government, and that will be their first and foremost priority. And in that sense, they won't want to drag it on for any longer than it has to be, because then there's always a possibility, however remote, that that could happen. That said, they're also not going to go to World War III with the United States over Iran. That is not in their national interests. If it becomes that the Iranian government looks like it's about to fall, well, I believe that at that point, the US will have expended so many resources and be putting themselves in such a bad diplomatic position with regards to the rest of Eurasia, that Russia and China will be able to deal with the consequences of that, unfortunate. But I don't think we're going to. That is not, I think, a likely possibility out of all of this. I think the most likely is an inconclusive results, where the U.S. does incredible damage to Iran, where Iran does significant damage back to Israel, certainly, possibly to U.S. military bases. The Iranian government loses some people, but their way of life, their government continues. The U.S. will doubtless declare victory, because that's, they have to. It's PR and narrative are more important than anything else to them. But again, if the Iranian government survives, they win. That's all that matters at this point. It's an existential struggle. The Iranians want to survive. The U.S. and Israel want regime change.
Mark, what is your assessment on the countries in the region, in the West Asia? I'm talking about going from Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
Qatar, going to Turkey. We know that the Israelis somehow are feeling that the worst enemy is becoming the new Iran is Turkey. As they talk, Naftali Bennett said that Turkey is the new Iran. But they're not happy with Saudi Arabia as well. Because UAE is somehow helping them the way that no one else is doing that for them in the Middle East. That's why I think they're comparing Saudi Arabia to UAE. Who's the friend? Of course, UAE. They see the tensions in Syria. They feel that maybe this is a confrontation between the Ottoman Empire and the empire that Israel wants to build. How do you see the whole situation in the Middle East, in the West Asia?
Okay, I think any rhetoric back and forth between Turkey and Israel is just that. Turkey has never done anything against Israel. I'm sure you've seen all these little meme clips and whatever online that show two dogs barking ferociously against each other with some kind of barrier in between them, and then they pull up the barrier and they both go and walk off. That's Turkey and Israel. All right, Turkey is still a member of NATO. However, independent, cunning beast foreign policy. I think that Erdogan has never done anything actually against Israel, and I don't expect that to change in the future. He has his domestic politics. His domestic base are Islamists, right? Sunni Islamists, right? Islam Justice Party, right? That's he is always going to play that card. But I look at actions, not rhetoric, and Turkey has never done anything. So they can snipe at each other all they want until I actually see something change. I consider Turkey a non-factor. In fact, relations between Turkey and Iran have gotten so bad as a result of what happened, Turkey helping, to a large extent, putting Al Qaeda in power in Syria, and also Turkish collaboration with Azerbaijan, and that threat to Iran. That relations between Iran and Turkey have soured very badly over the last few years. And I would not be at all surprised if Turkey very quietly greenlights the U.S. use of U.S. bases in Turkey for operations against Iran. That would not surprise me. Against Israel, I don't consider them. Now, Saudi is more interesting and more complicated. Saudi, first of all, let's be perfectly clear, Saudi is not a member of the Axis of Resistance, if anyone had any illusions. And Saudi isn't even a member of BRICS. Not really. Kind of put a foot in the water, offered, not accepted, but not denied. They're playing this both sides of the fence game. That's okay. I'm a realist, right? I'm a cynic as well as a realist, and I understand that. I actually see that whatever I may, and I did not have very good opinion of Mohammed bin Bonsa a few years ago. I think he has seriously, under some fire, matured as a statesman, either him or his foreign policy team, whatever you want to call that. And they've shown, I think, increasing amount of maturity. And the rapprochement and partial normalizations of relations between Iran and Saudi, with Chinese and Omani help and so forth, is a sign of that maturity. And his very effective ongoing cooperation with Russia in OPEC Plus, I think it's all to a credit. I mean, again, looking at Saudi Arabia from a realist, national interest orientated perspective, they have made clear that they think this is a mistake. That they're very afraid of what might happen in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think at this point, they're not even sure that they really want the U.S. to overthrow the Iranian government. Sometimes better the devil you know, right? Especially when you're able to sit down and have a talk with that devil now, right? So I think that they are not behind this. They're also increasingly having reservations about Israel. They're afraid, I think, of what in Israel, without at least the potential of threat from Iran and Iran-backed groups. I think Saudi is saying that we're okay with the status quo as it is now. We're not sure we want a major shakeup, especially after just what had just happened in Syria. We're not even sure that that is where that is right now. I think Saudi wants to sit this one out. They're not going to go to war with Israel, right? But they have said at least that they're not going to allow their airspace to be used for attacks against Iran. Now, I'm also skeptical about that. The U.S. is capable of applying all kinds of pressure and carrots and sticks and so forth. But even if they do, it's clear enough to me that this is not something that they want, or at least they're not sure that this is what they want. So they're not enthusiastic about it, is the very least that we can say. The other Middle East players are less, the UAE is, I think, less of a player in all of this, right? They've got their own interests, and Iran is not particularly one of them. They will certainly allow their country to be used to launch attacks, but they're not going to get involved more than that. I wouldn't see. So the rest of the Gulf, and we'll try to sit this one out. I think Egypt, as far removed from this as they are, would be at least slightly more favorable on the Iranian side in all of this, but they're not going to get involved either. I think the big wild card is what's going to happen in Iraq. And not the Iraqi government, because we know they're under the thumb of the United States and the US controls their own oil revenues and everything. But there are enough Iraqi groups at a sub-state level, right, both within the military and outside of it, that will certainly, if it becomes a serious long conflict, get involved on Iran's behalf. I have no question about that. And the US, I think, is very cognizant of that as well. We're going to see the continuing evacuation of US military bases that they believe are the most vulnerable and diplomatic facilities throughout the region over the next week. And I think what is Iraq is going to be, the most important place for those evacuations. We're already seeing, if you noticed last week, the U.S. announced they're withdrawing more troops from Syria because, among other things, they say they're quite happy with al-Qaeda rule there. I believe that. But also, those troops could be vulnerable. So, as well, because Syria is not, shall we say, completely controlled space, right? So getting them out of the line of fire there, I think, is part of the rationale that is going on as well. So it's not just going to be a long range strike war of attrition, because while, first of all, the axis of resistance has been mauled over the last few years. I know people, they survive that. Kudos, right? The Houthis were attacked, they survived. Hezbollah took a lot, but they're still alive. Hamas, not technically axis of resistance, however you want to put it, they're not Shia, but there's a degree of cooperation there. Still alive, not in a good condition, but. And then we can talk Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq and numerous other groups there, popular mobilization units. All of them know, however bad they're hurt, however bad relations between Iran and the members of Axis resistance have gotten with Pezeshkian in power over the last few years. And I do not believe that there's a lot of serious goodwill there from Pezeshkian towards the Axis of resistance, which, from a future historical perspective, I think people will say absolute worst president for Iran to have in this time period. But they will realize, no matter what, that this is likely to be an existential conflict for them as well. If the Iranian government does go down, then they're gone. I mean, they lose, whatever support they had, and they will be also then taken out one by one, whatever they have left. So they will activate if this becomes a long, serious campaign. And they may not have the most offensive capability, but they will all do what they can. And certainly they will keep Israel very busy.
I
And
think
that
more
real conflict. That is fire across the Middle East.
Yeah. Mark, I think that the difference between this time around, if the war happens, would be that Iran is somehow prepared and Russia and China are prepared to inform Iran if the attack is coming. That would be hugely different from what we've seen in June 2025. And that's why I don't think that the United States would have the upper hand the way it had before, or Israel the way it had in 2025 in June. This would make the situation, the whole case of attack on Iran, so much difficult because they can hit, Iran can hit as well. It's not just the United States hitting. And it's Iran is a vast country.
It is.
They're not going to be able to control each and every element within Iran.
But also remember what happened in June. It was only Israel going on the offensive. It was only Israel. The U.S. played a defensive role defending Israel, right? And yeah, at the end, there was this sideshow with them dropping some bunker busters, and that may have all been prearranged again with Iran, as a face saving performance on both sides. But the U.S. will be coming in to kill this time. That is going to be a significant more offensive power, long range strike damage that is going to be done to Iran straight out of the bat than we saw last time. So, yes, what you said, but also that. So keep that in mind. The first thing that tells us is this going to be a much higher intensity and higher stakes right out of the bat. I mean, it's going to be very hard, very quick. There's going to be no punches pulled. And the whole goal of Iran in the first 48 to 72 hours will be to survive, reconsolidate, and then fight back, right? That similar to what happened last time. From a military strategic perspective, if I was Iran, I would be launching preemptive strikes. I would say this is coming. There's no question about this. We should launch the surprise attack. We should act first. They've certainly provoked us, and the rest of the world clearly sees what's going on here. If they're going to come for us, well, then let's get the jump on them. But I'm not in charge of the Iranian government and military, and
go ahead.
Let's hope the IRGC and Pezeshkian are on the same page right now. That's all I'm saying.
I would say they are.
I hope so.
They are. And when you talk about preemptive attack, you're talking about long before the attack happening, or Iran preempting the attack at the moment that they're feeling the attack is coming.
What now? I mean, it's coming. Why wait until the U.S. has got everything they think they need in place, right? If they've identified vulnerable assets now, if they've got satellite pictures of air defense and everything, and there's no question that it's coming, and from everything I have seen, there's no question that it's coming, then I'm when it comes to war games like that, I'm usually of the belief that the best offense is a good defense. But Iran doesn't have the best defense, right? They're not in that capability. They don't have that air and missile defense that would allow them to play that game against the United States. So in that case, my instinct would be then my stronger card is my offense. Well, then let's hit those air defense facilities now when they're not expecting it. That's what I would say. Let's activate resistance. Let's activate covert groups across the Middle East first. Let's do that now, right? There's even the we're not responsible. There, it's the proxies acting and not us. That is an even better card to play. If I had the ability to activate Kataib Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hezbollah, I would activate them now and make, getting whatever jump I can and making perfectly clear that this is not going to be a drop some bombs and declare victory if you start this. We know you're out for blood, and we're out to survive by whatever it takes. That's what I would do. But
Actually, we've heard it from the Iranian commander recently,
yes,
1 week ago, that the Iranian strategy has changed from defensive to offensive. I don't know if what would be that moment in their mind that they're gonna go on offensive. They're gonna, if they're gonna start all together, not just from inside, but from outside. Because my understanding is that they're gonna attack from all sides, from what they have at the moment, and they're going to attack.
that's unfortunately that's a decision made at the political level. And
Yeah.
again, the Iranian president is not Raisi. The Iranian president is Pezeshkian.
Yeah.
Now, of course, what level of decision making the Ayatollah? Certainly, I would believe that he has the ability to overrule the Iranian president in this if he felt it was necessary. But obviously, that's not something he would normally want to do.
But if the war happens, it doesn't matter how the president of the Iran is thinking. President of Iran going to be part of those people who are going to decide about what would be the strategy. The president going to be one of them. And the head of the Security Council, many people are going to be in that council deciding about what is the strategy. I think that's why I don't see that much Pezeshkian influence in the decision on the part of the Iranian government and the part of Iran.
Yeah. I absolutely hope you're right. I absolutely hope you're
right. That's what I heard when I was in Iran. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark.
Hey, we're all on thumb. We're all on thumbnails. We're all watching this, biting our teeth, and
yeah,
we're all. I think everyone watching this, and except for a few trolls in the comments, is on the same side here. So we all want the best for Iran and the Iranian people, which, as far as is also the best for the people of the entire region out of all of this, and we all want to see the U.S. and Israel, take a big L in this particular situation. But it's not going to be sure, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be terrible and bloody. And we can't foresee everything, but I think we have gone over a lot. And I know I've been watching other people on your channel saying a lot of the same things, maybe not all in exactly the same cynical, realist framework that I operate from. But, it takes all kinds. So I think there's some consensus anyway.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. Great pleasure as always. Just let me mention your page on Boosty, boosty.to/therealpolitic. On the right side of the Mark, you can see the address of of his page on Boosty. Boosty is something like Substack, if I'm not mistaken, Mark.
It's more like Patreon.
Yeah. It's more.
Patreon.
Yeah.
It's a sanctions-proof Patreon clone.
Good. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. And I'll see you on the other side of this one, more than likely.
Exactly. See you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.